I'm with the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm joined today with Ryanne. Ryanne, you have Solutions Counseling. Can you tell us a little bit about you?
I am a combat trauma specialist. I'm a psychotherapist, and I had 7 years of experience in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And when I came home, I decided that I would continue with that general purpose by helping our sisters and brothers in arms to come home. So I was a contractor, I was not military, but now I work with military and first responders, and then by extension, a lot of nurses and doctors and that sort of, police officers and firefighters. And that's kind of my wheelhouse.
So truly trauma care, trauma related.
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you. I've asked you to join me today to kind of touch base on not necessarily only pandemic related issues, but a lot of the things that we are facing since for the past 8 months, we've all put our lives under microscopes and we're living a little bit closer to each other, and we're hurting as a society is the simplest way to put it. We really love being problem solvers at the Chamber, and we're always ready to give out resources and work with you to support your businesses and overcome challenges. But in the midst of what's likely the most stressful time anybody's gone through,
Right.
Anybody in the working age America, at least, that has gone through, we're recognizing that people and businesses need a little bit more help. It's not just we need support services for our businesses. Emotionally, some of them are reaching the end of their ropes.
Yes.
And so just the basics of what is happening with COVID-19, as of November 24th, US deaths are 257,000, according to the CDC. In contrast, in America, last flu season, we had 34,200 deaths to the flu, as categorized by the flu, according to the CDC. So this is a scale in which we've not otherwise seen. Our hospitals are overloaded. We're taking inflow from other places, but we still have to handle our Great Falls residents as well who need those services. And so we're just at max capacity. And in Montana, we're arguably faring pretty well compared to some other places whose rates aren't measured by the 100,000. They're measured by the 10,000. So Montana's unemployment high was a historical high was in April of this last year of 2020 at 11.9%. And we're currently sitting at 4.9% at the end of October. But it doesn't necessarily feel that way. If you ask employers how they're finding employees, some places are getting employees no problem. Other places are having a hard time getting people to come to work because of the fear that surrounds going out to the workplace, but also because parents now have to stay home with kids if they've chosen to keep their kids home. My family personally has had to be home in quarantine a couple of times due to contact tracing in the schools. And now the schools are shut down and we'll be going back shortly, but there's so much complication around keeping employees.
Yes.
So it doesn't necessarily feel like 4.9% when you're trying to find employees,
Right.
or even when you're trying to find a job right now. This global health crisis we're in, we've touched a little bit off camera, but it's a really polarizing issue. So when people go to work, if they're able to go to work, they may still feel isolated because of their viewpoints. We've got people who say, there's no issue, please come to work. And we've got other people who say, I can't come to work. I'm worried about what will happen if I catch COVID-19, and which is a valid fear. Do you have anything to speak to compassion in the workplace when dealing with these incredibly large issues?
So I think that when we look at this issue, we need to just to be able to wrap our brains around it, we almost need to look at it as it's an issue. It's similar to anything else that happens. I remember a couple of years ago, the internet went down in the entire state and California and stuff like that for like 2 days. And all of a sudden businesses come to a screeching halt. Now, granted, that was only 2 days, but it was like, holy cow, what do we do now? Now, that wasn't a global epidemic or pandemic, but it was still, we have to all of a sudden shift gears. What we were relying on, we can't rely on anymore. So if we just bring it down to what's going on in our little corner of the world, and to do that, I think we turn off the TVs, right? First thing, stop feeding into the fear. Getting information is fine, but being obsessed with it and taking on all that global fear is not serving anyone. So bringing it down to, yes, I have a job can be huge, can be just almost life-changing if you're terrified about what's going on everywhere, right? So bring it down. Also, what is the story that you're telling yourself? If we're talking sides, on either side, right? If we're polarizing, if we're saying there's these people who say it's fine, and then there's other people who say it's not. If we're saying there's employees who don't want to go to work because they're afraid, and there's employers who say, wait, we're not going to have a business if you don't come to work. So if we're talking sides, what is the story you're telling yourself about the other side? Is it, holy cow, they don't care? If we're talking about the employer who wants you to come to work, or is it they're being lazy for the employee who says they're afraid, right? And if we can start saying, now, wait a minute, that employer, we think of businesses as, they have the, what is it called? The victimless crimes, right? Oh, it's just an insurance claim. So the insurance company is this nameless, faceless entity that can just pay out. Or it's just Costco and they're so big, they're not going to miss if I steal some of this, right? If we start thinking, now, wait a minute, businesses, my business is 2 people and families, 2 families who count on that income, right? If you look at your employer, is your employer really a nameless, faceless? And really, when you think about it, those people sitting next to you in the office are counting on that employer being able to keep that business running so that all of those families that work for them can still have jobs, can still have support. They're not nameless, faceless entities that are just trying to have, be slave drivers. Right. So if you have to, I always say, we can't kill the cow, right? And if we kill the cow, we have no milk. So you always keep the cow alive. And the cow is that business. As long as that cow stays alive, we all have milk. So if the employees start looking at why the employer needs them to come to work, while that does not say, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to go to work every day, because there's still the element of fear, but all of a sudden there's a lot more compassion and understanding. And then if the employer can look at the employees and say, wow, yeah, I really need you here, but I understand that your father has asthma and is 87 years old, and it can be a life or death situation if you come to work. So how can we get around this? How can you still work and contribute while still keeping yourself safe, or your father safe, or your family safe?
Right.
So it comes down to what's the story you're telling yourself? And is the story taking into account the true other side of the story?
I think that's an excellent point. That's spot on in a lot of ways, because we have a way of, in crisis, automatically dehumanizing the other side, right? So,
right.
It makes it easier to have an opposing opinion when the other side isn't human.
Right. Right.
Yes. So yes. We're not cogs. My name is Teresa. I'm not a number. I'm not a cog. I'm a human being, and I'm very grateful to work for the Chamber of Commerce, where a lot of my job is able to be remote.
Mhm.
And I've worked for an incredible board, and so I'm very lucky. And that's not lost on me. I know that a lot of our employers must be in their buildings in order
Right,
to fulfill their services to their
right,
clientele. Um, with with coming to the point, maybe you're a new business owner, maybe you are a new manager, and you're coming to this point where you've never had to make these really critical decisions before, um, or you've never faced having to deal with business stress on top of the everyday we're human beings type of crises that we deal with, vehicle problems, house issues, identity theft, these major things that happen in our lives anyway. And now
right,
on top of it, you're dealing with business issues, that you couldn't have expected ever.
right.
Um, how do you suggest, or what recommendations can you make to people who need to learn how to care for themselves in their real life, this life on the inside of a home,
Right.
um, and also care for a business?
I think one of the things to keep in mind is growth is painful. Generally speaking, growth is painful. When we start college, we have to learn how to get through that college, and we have to learn the ropes, and we have to learn how to take those new kinds of tests and everything. So COVID is forcing us all to grow. We have a strong learning curve. And what that means is we need to be a little more compassionate with ourselves too, and accept, holy cow, I have this amazing growth opportunity that I didn't necessarily ask for. So I think having some self-compassion is really, really important, but self-care is huge. So I like to do a little exercise with my clients. Do you mind if I use you as a guinea pig for just a moment?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I would like to know, in this moment, I would like you to tell me everything about every little detail about how your left big toe feels.
Tingly.
Okay. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it sweaty? Does it have a shoe on it?
It feels normal. It feels the direct contact of wood floor. Um, it feels pressure pushing against the floor. Um, I don't know.
That was beautiful. You gave me a lot there.
Okay.
So now I want to know, how much stress did you feel when you were telling me about your left big toe?
I definitely felt on the spot.
Okay. I'll give you that. I'll give you that. Were you worried about what your kids had for breakfast this morning, or if they were going to get to school on time or not get to school?
Definitely not.
No, you were focused on something tangible, something in the moment. Everything else kind of falls away.
Right.
We have experiences in our life that do that for us. Hopefully, we have experiences like dancing, right? If you love to dance, everything else falls away when I dance, or everything falls away when I ride motorcycles or crochet or whatever your thing is, right? Reading a book. So if we embrace those experiences that let everything else fall away, that's when we regenerate and we revive. Those are the experiences that we tend to stop doing when we're stressed, because our to-do list gets longer and longer and longer.
Right.
But those are the things we need to embrace. So if your to-do list is getting longer, I hope you're adding in, I need to crochet, I need to bake, I need to ride my motorcycle, maybe not today, I drove through snow. But I need to do these things, and they can be as simple as reading a book or watering plants or petting your dog. But remembering that those things are the things that are going to keep us in our best physical and mental health. And that's when we're going to be our most powerful are most able to make decisions, are most compassionate. When we forget to do all those things, that's when we tend to go off the deep end. That's when our breaking point hits.
Right.
And to understand that a lot of us, we're not going to the bars. I'm not pushing alcohol. I'm pushing socializing, right? We're not going out to eat as much. We're not getting together with our friends as much. So it's even more important to embrace those other things that you can, that are self-care. And self-care does not have to be, I meditate for an hour or whatever. It can be any of those things that makes the world fall away. Play Monopoly with the kids, right? Whatever, build a blanket fort.
So you and I have talked about how there's a very strong mentality of person who goes and builds a business, right? So how do we get through what may seem as a barrier that sounds so that sounds a bit reductive. It sounds a bit reductive to be like, sure, my business is in shambles, the world is falling apart, my father could potentially be dying of COVID, and I'm going to make myself a cup of coffee and spend 20 minutes listening to a little bit of music and walking my dog this morning.
Right, exactly. But when we look at normal life, right? When we look at the normal day-to-day pre-COVID time, when we had those routines, we were still building businesses. And let's face it, building businesses is not easy. It takes a lot of mental effort, physical effort, a lot of dedication and focus. But it's when we go on vacation, when we're driving, in that time when we're not quite awake yet, or we're not quite asleep yet. Those are the times those brilliant ideas come to us.
Right.
Those solutions come to us. So when we're looking at everything that's going on in our world right now, and I'm not talking global world, I'm talking our little world. Like you said, my father might be dying and my business is in a shambles and those types of things. Having those, I like to call them brain breaks, that's when you're freeing up your subconscious to actually hand you resolutions. No, it doesn't. It's not a switch. It doesn't happen immediately and automatically every time. But that's when we get those big insights, is when we allow that hamster wheel to slow down and maybe even stop for a little while. So when you're looking at everything going on and human interaction, the more stressed out you are. And in today's world, where we have autoimmune is higher than ever. I don't even know what percentage of my clientele, and I'm not an autoimmune specialist, but I have a high percentage of people with autoimmune on top of, right? And the reason for that is we're running ourselves down. Our immune systems are not only depressed, but they're almost shattering. We're pushing ourselves so hard that we're breaking down our bodies. So if you have to stop yourself and think, wait a minute, how run down am I willing to let myself get? Am I willing to let myself be bedridden so that my family has to then take care of me in addition to everything else? Am I willing to let myself be short-tempered so that my family has to put up with me in addition to everything else that's going on, right? Am I willing to let myself just be crying inside all the time so that I'm not fully present for everything? So it's kind of the spectrum from worst to almost least. Is that fair?
Right.
But that we are not machines. We cannot keep the foot on the gas pedal 24/7 because components break. So we have to incorporate self-care into our day and into our life if we want to keep our systems moving, if we want to keep our brains working, if we want to keep our emotions in check. We have to find that. And if you look at let me go back to my time overseas. I could sit here and I could tell you stories about those 7 years that would make you think, how the heck did you ever do that? And why would anybody want to? It was horrific. And yet I could sit here and I could tell you stories that would make it seem like I was at a spa for 7 years. It was so wonderful and community oriented and everything else, right? Both scenarios would be 100% true. I wouldn't have to fabricate either aspect. It's two sides of one coin. We have that same situation when our world is falling apart. There are two sides to every coin. Holy cow, I can't wait till my kids go back to school because they're making me crazy. And now I have to juggle school and or work and kids. And, you know, how are we going to do all this? The flip side of that is when are you going to have this amount of time with your kids to build those relationships and develop?
Right.
So I think as it's not about ignoring what's going on. It's not about saying, oh, this is unimportant. It's about saying every single experience that we have has two sides. And if we can look on the bright side, which I even cringe as I say it because it's so cliche, but if we can look on that bright side, if we can find that spark of light in the darkness, then suddenly we have a clearer mind. We can make clearer decisions. We can make better decisions. We can be there for our families, those people that we're worried about. We can actually be present and have quality time with them where we're present and we're sharing ideas and experiences, as opposed to, wait, no, you just lay there in bed because I have to go do. And we never even communicate with them.
You talk about that once we're in the right frame of mind to make those decisions. What happens when the decision you know you have to make is one that is devastating? What happens when you've come to the precipice and you say, this is the point, you know, this is the point where we can't go on any further. Bankruptcy is not going to work. I'm not going to be able to do anything. No more grants are available for me. I have no more available funding. I'm tapped out. The bank won't help me out any further. And this is it. I can't save my employees. I can't save my business. I have to be done.
Right.
Then what? How do you stop that from defining you or taking over you, that you didn't do everything you could?
Part of me wants to say, you know, you look to the future but let's face it, in that moment, it's devastating.
Right.
Life sucks. And no amount of cheerful talk and, you know, you pull your bootstraps up and you keep going. It's not going to make it better in that moment.
Right.
You are going to have to endure a purpose shift, a temporary failure, if you will. You're going to, I mean, we would feel like we failed. However, if I look back on my life, and I'm sure if you look back on your life, you can see moments where it's like, man, I really, you know, I could see that as a failure, but I see where it went from there. And it was a change in direction, or however you want to reframe it later on. In the moment when you have to make that decision and your world falls apart, you know, you let it. Unfortunately, you realize that now I have to accept this temporary setback, momentary defeat, ultimate failure, right? Wherever you are in that moment, however you're thinking of it, that's where you are. And I would love it if I had the answers to have no one go through any pain, but there are no answers like that. Life is painful. So you accept it, you do what you need to do, you mourn the loss of that, And remember that that is a death for you of your purpose, of your business, of your dreams, of your lifestyle, of whatever, however that impacts you, right? So for some people, you've got a spouse who can cover it. Maybe you don't have the extras, but you have that safety net. For other people, that's it. Your family had nothing else, right? And now you're just back to square one. You mourn the loss, you do the grieving, you do the time until you can get your feet back under you, have enough time to allow your brain to start working. If you've had a successful business once, I believe that you can certainly have a successful business again. It may not look the same, it may not feel the same, it may be a whole lot better. But you've got your network, you've got your connections, you have your infrastructure. Even if you're looking in a different direction, you already have your computers and your desks and that sort of thing, right? You may shift your focus, but you've already got a leg up on those people who've never started a business. You know how to do all the registration and the books and everything, right? So eventually, once you're through that mourning process, that's when you get up and you start rebuilding. And when I look at the chamber, and I've been a member for a number of years now, and there's so much help out there that I was completely unaware of. I went on a whim. Someone invited me to a B&G meeting, and it's been wonderful. And I'm not one of those people who can get all the referrals at the B&G meetings, and this made my business, right? It doesn't work that way for psychotherapy. But that support and that community was huge and still is. And I don't see any of you guys anymore since COVID, right? I'm not even in town most of the time.
Right.
But I know I still have that safety net. And I know that if I call you guys, you're going to give me directions for resources for businesses.
Absolutely.
And anyone watching this has those same resources. It's not easy, but it wasn't easy the first time you built your business either.
Can you touch a little bit on how critical actually going through a grief process is? And one of the things I really, when I talk about grief with whoever, is we talk about all the levels of grief or the different stages of grief,
Right.
but we expect grief to be linear.
Right.
And I like to say that grief is spherical. Grief is the little bouncy ball inside of a sphere.
Right.
And so you don't know what could be coming at you, what's going to trigger it, or where you're going to end up, and it's being along for that wave. So in the grief of our changing world, in the grief of maybe you've lost a loved one during this pandemic, maybe you've lost a business or a job, whatever it might be, everything right now has changed.
Right.
So how do we cycle through that grief process?
So that's a really good question. And I'll be honest, I'm not a grief expert. And I'll tell you why. I was overseas for 7 years. What do we do when somebody next to us dies, right? I remember in my first year over there, I ended up with a new position because someone was killed, 2 hours before. And it's like, well, Ryan, you're up next. What do? You don't break down. You put it in a little box and you shove it in a hole.
Right.
And because of that, I have a great amount of job security because it comes back and it bites you in the ass, pardon me. So addressing that grief in the moment can be really, really powerful and important. And there's a point where you're processing grief versus playing tapes, right? This isn't about, oh, poor me, I can't ever move forward. But this is about allowing yourself to, for a period of time, say, oh, woe is me, I'll never move forward, knowing fully that the next morning you're going to wake up and you're going to find a way to move forward. Okay, so I think there's ways to put limits on how deep you go into that grief. There's, of course, grief support groups. Right. There are, and there's our neighbors, and there's our friends, and there's those people around us. So I think when you put it in a box like we tend to do, that's a trauma moment where you have no choice but to move on.
Right.
In today's world, in the civilian world, nobody's going to shoot you while you're mourning. So take the time. Take the time just to allow all those feelings and those dynamics to happen, realizing that you are an entrepreneur. Are you kidding me? This isn't going to stop you. This is a stumbling block, and it may be a major stumbling block, and it may feel like a cliff you just fell off of.
Right.
But you've done it before, and you can and will do it again. As long as you keep that in the back of your mind as you're going through the anger and the sadness and all of those different emotions, and realize too that your wife didn't do this to you. Your husband didn't do this to you. Your kids didn't do this to you. And nobody did this to you. This is a reality that happened. Yeah. So you're not a failure. You just need to find a new way to do.
Especially when there's not a circumstance we can control, when it's outside of ourselves and we kind of feel like there's nothing to blame. Like there's no moment of, if I would just have X, Y, and Z.
Right.
There's nothing to solve. Again, we like to be problem solvers.
Right.
There wasn't a problem we could have solved. We tried.
Right.
And you still missed, there's a missing puzzle piece. You
right.
can't complete the puzzle. And so,
but if we control what we can, that's where we're empowered. And I don't mean control what we can as in keep the business open for till that very last day.
Right.
I mean, okay, I have to let this go, but what are my strengths? How can I recreate? Where can I go? Where do I start researching? Who do I talk to? You still have strengths. You have your network, you have your infrastructure, maybe you have a building and that building's not going to serve you, but now you have an asset that you can sell or rent out or whatever. And maybe it's not going to sell tomorrow because holy cow, we're in the middle of COVID. But maybe, it is solution searching and it is problem solving in the moment within our new bubble. And it's controlling what you can. You can control whether you lash out or not.
Right. I think one of the other very serious and, one of the things we don't want to talk about is that the stress can feel so overwhelming right now that it is critical that if you're feeling that stress, that you do reach out to someone and
Most
that
definitely.
You don't go through this alone. And this will not be somebody's end all.
Right. And it's funny. I was recently reading the Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, and I don't know. Have you ever heard of Hal Elrod?
No, I've heard of the Miracle Morning.
Okay. Well, the story, and I may butcher some of the details, but the gist of it is that when he was 20, he had a car accident that he was dead for 6 minutes, and then he woke up in the hospital being told he may never walk again. And he managed to run a marathon and everything after that. But then he lost his business at one point and was over $400,000 in debt and became deeply depressed. And he said that was endlessly more suffering than having died. It was worse than death. Mm-hmm. But when he looked at it, when he was in the hospital and didn't know if he would walk again, he had family, he had friends, he had all this support, he had medical practitioners, everybody saying, we'll help you. We've got you. You've got this, right? So he had all of this support. When he lost his business and was so in debt, there was nobody there. There wasn't this traumatic incident where everybody's there saying, we've got you.
Yeah.
So that community, that support is invaluable. And if we can reach out and say, hey, I'm in pain, I'm scared, I'm angry. The unique thing about this situation is none of us is alone in this. We all feel isolated and alone. And yet we are all going through the same thing.
Right.
And some of us don't want to bother other people, right?
Right.
We don't want to put our stuff on them. However, if you turn that around and start thinking, okay, who can I call just to check in with today? Even if you have problems and are struggling and need their support, you're probably giving them as much, if not more support, just by reaching out.
Right.
Not one of us is alone in this. Every single one of us would welcome that phone call to say, hey, we can't do coffee. We can't get together for a beer. So how's it going?
Definitely.
Tell people play Yahtzee on Zoom. It's the one game I can think of that, you know, if you have a deck of cards, it doesn't work because you have 2 decks of cards, right?
Right.
Yahtzee is one game that it's okay. You can see it. You all can play and you can play it by Zoom. I don't care if you play Yahtzee or not, right? But be creative. That's what we're going to be able to take away from this is that growth and that creativity. And how did we get through this? This is not going to last forever. How did we get through it? I know people doing wine tasting parties every month online.
Right.
Cool is that?
Right.
That's awesome. But we can also just pick up the phone and say, hey, how are you doing? I just want to check in with you. Life really sucks for me right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we're taught it's better to give than to receive, right? And a lot of us don't even know how to receive grace graciously at this point. But if no one's willing to receive, then no one can give.
Right.
So when you think about it, if you're to give someone a gift, who gets more joy out of that? It's kind of a toss-up, right? Because it's so much fun to do something for someone. But when we're in a bad state, if we can reach out, or if you flip it around, like you were saying, if someone called you and said, hey, I need something, suddenly you're less isolated and you have a purpose for however brief or long amount of time that is.
Right.
We are all craving purpose right now. So having that purpose, that distraction, that whatever you want to call it and however you want to look at it, that in itself is so valuable. We are a tribal species. Without tribal interaction, we do not thrive. If we are alone in our homes, who's going to be the first one to reach out? It's not the weak one that's going to reach out first. It's the one with the courage to reach out first.
Yeah.
We're entrepreneurs. Come on.
Yeah. I really appreciate you taking the time today to kind of walk through this. Like I said, I know we're so used to pushing out the resources, but it hit me how ill-spoken the weight of what we're all going through and the weight of what our business owners are going through, and managers. And so I want to let those folks know that this is, we know you're there. We see you, we know you're there. We might not know the exact minutia of what you're facing, but we know the decisions that you're making are really difficult. No one approaches closing a business for 2 weeks or a month or whatever it might be, approaches that lightly.
Right.
And to hear, when we hear that news, we're not sitting here going, oh snap, we're going, oh my goodness, the moments that it took to get there, those nights, the sleepless nights, We know there's business owners going without pay in order to pay their employees or pay operating costs. And
Right.
that's not overlooked either, you know?
Right.
I mean, these are huge sacrifices that people are making. And our community deeply appreciates it. Us at the chamber, we are here to support you guys in any way that we possibly can, even to take these moments and talk.
And I really wish that I had some kind of magic bullet that would make everyone that sees this, everyone that you talk to, I wish I had some magic formula that says, oh, COVID's okay, and don't worry, it's all good. And that's just not even close to realistic. All I can say is it sucks. And we need to walk through it. And the only way to walk through it is one step at a time, but to help each other, to put a hand out for those people walking alongside you. And if they stumble, help catch them, and be willing to reach your hand out if you are stumbling. I'm so sorry. Hence the being at home while I'm working, but to be able to reach out when you're stumbling. You never know when your experience shared is going to touch someone else who was too afraid to reach out.
Definitely.
And you're both better for it.
Definitely. Well, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I really appreciate this.
I appreciate you reaching out. And I appreciate everything the chamber does. I can't say enough for the Great Falls Chamber. I've never been a member of a Chamber of Commerce before and never considered it. And I don't know if I'm kicking myself because y'all are so amazing. So maybe they were amazing in other places, or if I'm just thinking, you know what?
We're the best.
No chamber could be close to the Great Falls Chamber of Commerce. I love it that every time I walk in, everyone is pleasant, knows me by name. I think you know everybody by name, and I have no idea how you do that. And everyone's been so helpful. So thank you for that. If I can be of further help to you or anybody in the chamber, you're more than welcome to reach out.
Thank you.
Thanks,
well, with that, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, and happy holidays coming up. They're going to be unique, but they can still be joyful.
Yes, they'll be filled with love, if nothing else.
Yes.
So.